Okay, welcome back to The Skill Economy, the podcast about closing the gap between what school and university teach and what the real world actually expects. Today, we're joined by Michael. He spent his career on both sides of that question as both an operator and a leader, and now through his work redefining graduate recruitment at GradWorx. Michael started his career straight into Goldman Sachs in the 90s, then went on to work across the UK, the US, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Australia. And he's really seen how different careers unfold and has that behind the scenes knowledge, and also understands why so many young people are struggling to stand out and what they can do to do more. So Michael, welcome to the podcast. How's your morning been?
I'm good, thanks, George. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Morning is going great so far.
No, I'm really excited. So a bit of background context, me and Michael have been chatting probably on and off for like the last 3 or 4 months on a similar sort of mission. And we explored a lot of synergies, and I'm really excited to bring some of those today. So I think I'd love to dive right into it by going straight in with what are some of the biggest challenges that you think young people are facing today in terms of landing a job?
That's a big question, a really big question, and I think we could talk for a whole podcast on
Mhm.
on that question alone. But I do think today's graduate recruitment market is probably one of the most challenging that I've ever seen in 30 years of my career. I think the level of competition is higher than ever. It's amazing that we've got so many talented students coming through higher education, be it college or university. But that means that there's a lot of well-educated and skilled labor coming onto the market every year, and that's sort of in the hundreds of thousands here in the UK alone. In the US, it's even more, and around the world. And I think it's important to realize that about the global labor market, particularly within this demographic, because there's such a high level of social mobility, of professional mobility, and particularly with remote working. There's greater opportunity for young students to find employers, not necessarily in their local area or where they've grown up or where they've graduated, but either nationally around the UK or even internationally. And that creates both an opportunity, but also a greater challenge. And I think the level of competition is higher than ever. We can't escape also the economic effect and economic market that we're in at the moment. A lot of businesses are choosing to pause the recruitment that they had planned or that they have traditionally done in the previous few years. And that's creating even more competition for limited places. And I also think it goes back to something that you speak a lot about as well, which is how well prepared are students after graduating or leading up to graduating to be able to secure that first career job, but also to be able to add value to the companies that they join when they first get that first job out of university. So I think there's a great challenge and also a big disconnect between academic life, graduation, and then their first professional career role, and how ready they are in order to be able to make that transition.
When you reflect back on yourself graduating in I guess it was the late 80s, is that right? Or was it the 90s?
I graduated in from university in 96.
96, right,
Yeah,
okay.
not that old yet, George.
And was it the same when you graduated? Was it like this fierce competition, similar game you had to play? Has much really changed?
Honestly, I don't think anything has changed, and that is what really drove me to think about starting GradWorx as a company, because I really felt like nothing really had changed. The same pressures and the same inefficiencies are still occurring today as I experienced back in '96. In '96 we were filling out application forms by hand, actually, more than online. So it was a very different era. We were still typing up our resumes in Microsoft Word. We were typing up cover letters. We were sending them off by post. So 30 years is quite a long time, and a lot has changed. But the same problems and inefficiencies still exist, in my opinion. And so that's what really drove me to want to create GradWorx and try and create something that was a whole lot more efficient, but also better recruitment rather than just voluminous recruitment. So, has much changed? I don't think it has. Applications are still asking for cover letters and CVs. We now have these systems, ATS systems, that are now weeding out candidates, unfortunately, in either an effective way or a very ineffective way. But I think for the student journey and the student experience, not much has changed at all from what I had to go through. And the level of competition for roles is equally, if not more, exacerbated by the numbers of volumes, a number of students that are graduating, the limited number of roles. So I think net, I think it's probably equally as challenging as it was 30 years ago. Not a lot has changed despite technology drastically changing during that period. And I think this creates an opportunity for us to explore how can we make this a better experience and better results for both sides of the equation, young students and graduates, and also for employers that are looking to recruit.
Big time. And I think I'd love to get more onto the student side of things because, GradWorx, from what I understand, talks about redefining graduate recruitment, bringing a new light and angle to it. And, you've seen the flaws and you've seen how it's not changed. What does that mean to you in terms of what the student experience should be like almost? Like, how do you think about that and what needs to change?
Yeah, we've really taken a very conscious, focus starting with students, firstly, because we really felt like a lot of the existing jobs boards that are still out there today and have been around for a long time really took the focus of the companies and employers, firstly, because that's obviously where they make money and that's where the revenue is. And from a business perspective, I can understand that. And it really is a balance between the two. But we really set out from the early days to try and improve the student experience, recognizing that this was partly the most exciting time in a young student's life when they're graduating university and starting their career, starting their life, and starting to shape what that would be. But at the same time, the deflating effect of I've sent out 100 CVs to 100 companies. I've had to do this very much on my own. I haven't had a lot of support either from the university or from the career service, and very much feeling like it's a very lonely journey and becomes a very negative journey when they start to receive, either no feedback whatsoever or rejection after rejection and hundreds of hours invested with no results. So we really wanted to try and improve that journey through GradWorx, where we just started to help students feel like, there are options for me as far as what my career prospects could be. There are new ideas out there that I haven't considered that I could start to think this might be the future career for me. And actually the tools by which I can feel in control of my application journey, as far as I know where I'm sending applications, I know what dates I sent those out on, I can track them, I can continually look for new ideas and new contacts in which to reach out to. So we're trying to improve the journey so it becomes a positive one. It feels one that's empowering and actually gives students the optimism that actually this is heading in the right direction. I've still got work to do. I haven't landed that job yet, but I feel like I'm in control and reaching out to the right people and applying for the right jobs for me. And we like to think that actually this then creates a situation where better results can happen.
I mean, some of that sounds like you're helping students get the right strategy in place, giving them something to track things on, giving them a place to find out things. So when you look at trying to help students gain that strategy that might be more favorable for them, what do you think a lot of students are getting wrong when thinking about like their strategy of trying to land their first job, or maybe it's a career pivot? What are they doing wrong?
I share this example quite often, and I think it's still pertinent today as it was in my day. But I think there is this overriding, I think two things actually, if I can highlight them. I think there's still this strong belief amongst students that they need to be applying to the biggest companies in the UK. They need to be applying to the financial services firms and the legal firms and the management consultancy firms, because that in a status type way seems to be a successful first job or a successful graduation into their career. So there's this belief that I should be applying to the biggest companies, but yet by doing that, I'm also putting myself into the most competitive, market to land that first job. And by doing that, you've really increased, you're setting yourself up to fail almost, because it's so much harder to do that. And these companies are so, as brilliant as they are, and they do recruit quite large classes into graduate programs each year. But I think the mistake that students are making is that this is what I need to be doing, whether it's right for them or not. And I think quite often it's probably not the right place for a lot of students to be starting their careers. And also it's so hard and so competitive to land one of those few jobs that exist. So I think the belief is I've got to land a job in a big known company in order to feel successful post-graduation, even though that might not be the right place for them to start. And so what they're doing by doing that is overlooking this majority of companies out there in the UK, which are small and medium-sized businesses that actually equally is dynamic, growing really quickly, working on really interesting projects with really interesting cultures and teams of people that actually many students would probably succeed more by joining those companies. So I think that's one sort of belief that is probably held incorrectly currently. And the other one I would say is sort of mass applications and voluminous applications. You know, I think when you are looking at a list of 100, 200, 300 companies to apply to, and probably feeling the time pressure of doing that with application deadlines and exams and things like that, you actually do probably applications that are less relevant, less focused, therefore less impactful, and therefore you're probably not putting your best candidacy forward as a candidate, as a person, as being the right person for those roles. So I actually think in this case, less is more. Be more targeted, be more focused, focus on a smaller number of companies within a sector that you're really passionate about, for roles that you're really interested in doing, and actually put a better application, either form or CV or cover letter together, or even just sort of your application journey. How am I reaching out? How am I networking, etc., such that it's more targeted and therefore more purposeful, more intent. And I really believe that actually can create better results. So I think less applications rather than voluminous scattergun approach is another mistake that a lot of students are still making.
I love the advice on not always looking at the big companies. Like, I just think there's so much to learn when you go and join a smaller company. And so I guess that leads me to my next question, which is you obviously left university, went and joined one of the most popular graduate jobs at Goldman Sachs. You know, a lot of people want to go into a big company like that for the experience and the name and the logo and everything that comes with the learning experience there, of course. And did you feel like you knew that was the right place for you? And if so, how did you figure that out? Or the opposite, like, did you realize that wasn't the right place for you and you figured that out?
Yeah, it's more the latter, actually, because it's a great question. Look, you know, working at Goldman's was one of the best experiences of my career and of my life, really. I loved it. I was with Goldman's for 5 years. You know, I transitioned into a number of different roles during that period. I worked with some of the best and most interesting people I've ever met, and worked on some great projects. I loved my time there, but I probably a year or 2 years into that experience started to realize it probably wasn't the natural place for me. But just going back a step, when I graduated university, I kind of scraped through university. I kind of made a lot of mistakes very early. I chose probably the wrong degree. I probably chose the wrong university. And therefore I had a very challenging university experience. I had to work really, really hard to get through and graduate. And therefore I didn't love my university academic experience. I loved the social experience, of course, like many of us, but I really had to work very hard to get through the academic experience. And then I graduated, but it was a very tough experience. I then followed all of my key peers and colleagues into the City of London because that's where everyone was going in those days. And I really didn't have much exposure outside of finance and investment banking to consider other careers. So I very much had a very narrow focus on what my initial steps were going to be career-wise, and even long-term. I thought, yes, I'm going to be a banker for the rest of my life. This is what everyone does, and this is what successful people do. But I was very fortunate to land my first job at such a prestigious, organization as Goldman Sachs, which I still hold very highly today. But I did realize early into that experience, as I said, 1 or 2 years into that experience, that probably I wasn't a natural investment banker. I wasn't a natural Goldman Sachs employee. And again, like I did in university, I had to work very hard to survive and to thrive to a certain extent. But I definitely probably recognized it wasn't the right environment for me. And again, that was another motivator for me in building GradWorx, is that I really felt like I didn't really have the knowledge, exposure, or influences in my life to explore who I was as a young professional, and what was potentially the right career paths, roles, sectors, and industries that would be a better fit for me. So I think the long story short out of my initial early career, and this went on for quite a long time as well, I would say, I was probably a fish out of water. I was probably in the wrong environment, and really only succeeded through sheer willpower, dedication, and hard work. But I really think I could have achieved more, and probably in an easier fashion, if I'd really discovered my true, skill sets, interests, and areas of ambition sooner than I had when I was in my 20s.
Yeah, it's hard though to make that decision and also to come to that realization without being that fish out of water for a little bit. And so I still think though there's, when you leave university and enter a company like that, the difference is just huge between how you need to operate and perform. And so I think there's a lot to learn from that in the way that, maybe Goldman training their early careers employees and that learning journey that you went through. So what do you feel like were like some of the things you learned in your early days there that sort of shaped a bit of who you are now and things that you've kept with you?
Well, that's a great question. I think I probably learned, I was going to say learned more in a personal sense, but I still think I use skills today that I learned from those early career experiences, especially at Goldman's and then my subsequent roles after that as well. I always, throughout my career, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about it in a little bit, I've had a bit of a squiggly line type career, but I've always been very motivated by learning and taking on experiences where I felt like I was developing as a person, both professionally and personally. And so, as I said, a lot of the skills I learned in those early days from Goldman, both personally and professionally, I'm still using today and have shaped the professional that I have been for the last, 15, 20, 25 years. So, I think back to the Goldman times, like I had some fantastic training. I had some great mentors and peers. I definitely learned how to work hard, work long hours, and all of that is pretty well known from the investment banking market as far as the demands of what it's like to be an employee there. And I think there's a lot of sort of financial and research type skills that I still use today. But I definitely think what I value the most today that I probably learned from those early days is resilience. And being able to sort of understand situations even when they're going against you and be able to figure out either solutions or paths that you can navigate in order to turn those around into something more positive. So, I definitely think in a personal sense, I still have skills that I'm using today in a really valuable way that I didn't realize I learned in those early days of my career. So, I honestly think my career has been years and periods and phases that have built on each other, and I've always sought out opportunities and experiences to sort of develop my own career and skill sets within that period.
Cool. Like you said, I think there's a lot of adaptability and like pivots in there, as you mentioned. When you look back at the decisions that you made and the pivots that you made, how did you know when was the right time to make a career change or go somewhere else versus when was the wrong time? Because a lot of students, they land up in their first job now, and you've seen it, the stats, like retention of early career candidates is so low. People are always thinking about pivoting. How should they know when to think about making a career change?
That's a great question, a really great question. Look, I think the older I've gotten, I've started to realize your instinct is very, it gives you, it's a very truthful, honest thing. And sometimes it's a bit inconvenient. We don't want to listen to our instinct. We might be in a role or a team or working with a boss that it's probably not the right fit for us, or we're just on different wavelengths. And I think sometimes it's really important to be honest with ourselves as far as where are we today? Are we in the right position? Am I sort of excelling as an individual as well as in my role? And I think instinctively we can look at ourselves in the mirror and really sort of be honest and feel whether that's right or not. It then comes down to the harder part is the courage to make a move if that's the right thing to do, or the courage to stay and say, I'm gonna commit to this for another X period and try and turn this into a positive. So to answer your question, when to stick, when to pivot, when to make a big change, I do think the older I've gotten, I've started to rely more on that instinctive feeling as far as, is this still the right place for me, or is it time to broaden my horizons? Sometimes you don't have to make a move immediately. You could just sort of change your focus to be a little bit more broader, start to look a little bit wider as far as, I'm okay for the moment, but I'm going to keep my eyes and ears open. I'm going to speak to a few more people about what's happening in the market or what other people are doing in other companies, and just start to educate myself on what the potential opportunities or alternative opportunities could be. And I think that's a safe way of doing it, because I don't think life and career is a zero-sum game. It's not like I'm here or I'm not. It's not I'm going to stick with this job or I'm leaving. I'm quitting tomorrow. I think life should be more of a gradual, controlled, natural progression. And by doing that, you A, stay in control, and B, you probably find the better paths and opportunities to pursue by doing that, sort of better decision making, I would say. So when to stick and when to pivot, I think when you realize you're probably not in the right place, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to make a big change and a drastic change and make a big statement, quit and walk out the door. I think you can just sort of quietly within yourself say, you know what, I think I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to speak to a few people outside of my immediate sphere and just assess what's going on elsewhere, and what potentially might be the next right move for me. And that might be in a month's time, might be in 6 months or 12 months time. And when you have that sort of inner plan within yourself, you take away a lot of the anxiety that you might be feeling at the time, but you also feel in control of your life and your career. And I do think when you're in an awkward or bad situation, it's important to realize it's only temporary. This will pass. And if you take control of your own destiny and your own path, and you execute it in a way that you feel like this works for me, it feels natural, I feel in control, and therefore I'm going to make better decisions, then the next step will happen. It will happen. And that boss that you don't like, or who doesn't treat you very well, or that promotion that you missed out on, that is temporary. You will be moving on and you will be a better person for the experience, but it's not forever. So don't let it get you down. Think about what is right for you. Think about how you might broaden your horizon as to what are my alternative options and ideas and opportunities. And then start to, in your mind, put that into a plan of action as to how you can make that happen.
I feel like a recurring theme that I've already found a couple of times is this idea of like exploring curiosity. And it relates to instinct, these different things. But, you mentioned there about, look, if you're not sure about your job or you're thinking about it, just accept that you might explore some other things and be curious about some other roles. Or, when you're thinking about your first job, be curious about different industries, talk to different people. In your career, what role has like that intellectual curiosity played in your growth?
Massively, massively. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think curiosity is one of the most impactful, positively impactful things you can develop in yourself. And it is something you can train and develop, I think. Sadly, I don't think we teach that in academia. We don't teach that in university. We teach students how to research, to work hard, etc. But it's all very much within a confined curriculum or within the textbooks that you're allocated, etc. And I don't think there's enough free thinking developed and taught as to how do you become a free thinker? How do you explore, topics and subjects that you might have a real interest in but don't know anything about when you're constrained within the curriculum of a certain degree. And so I do think curiosity is one of the superpowers that you can develop as a person, and especially as a young person. But I think sadly we have to do that on our own. But if we're lucky, we can find a network of friends or colleagues and peers that actually can help stimulate that free thinking for us in a real collegiate type way. So I do think that is a really powerful tool to create just in life in general, and our further learning and development as a person and a professional. But I think from your career, I think it's almost essential. I totally agree with you, and it's something I really regret I didn't do more of in my 20s. I've got a great example of a friend of mine I went to university with. And I think within the first 5 years of him graduating, he tried 4 different career paths within a very short period of time. He was constantly changing jobs, but not just jobs, he was changing careers. You know, he started off in banking, and then he went into trading on the commodities exchange in the pit that don't really exist anymore. He then went to work for his family business in logistics. And then he eventually went back to law school. So he did these complete 180 changes and turns where he really just changed his whole career. But he was really trying different things out. And at the time, it probably felt a little bit chaotic. It certainly did to us as his friends. But eventually he found the area that he was really passionate about and still works in today. And he's a very accomplished barrister today. After a 25-year career. But, you know, he had the courage to try different things. And if something wasn't working out, he would change. And I think in your 20s, you have a real opportunity to be nimble, to be flexible, to pivot, as you say. And I do think actually it's almost the best thing you can do, in a controlled way, in a way that you think, I'm building experience, I'm going to use this for the next role, I'm going to take the chance to try something new. But you really get to know yourself as a person and as a professional as to, what am I passionate about? What do I like to do? What am I interested in? What do I sort of do and think about even in my off time as opposed to during my work time? And I think what you do is you really start to figure out what's the right career path for me, because I'm almost certain the majority of young students and graduates finishing university think they know what they want to do for their career, but they really are just starting to figure that out, you know. And I think there's a lot of pressure on graduates to have that figured out quite quickly and quite early. And I like to think, when I do mentoring myself directly with students today, there is no rush. Your career in life is long. You don't have to have it all figured out today. And you can almost see the pressure come off their shoulders in a physical way as to, oh, okay, I can choose a direction today and make the best of it for a period of time and take that further if it's working, or pivot and change and try something else. And your 20s gives you the ability to do that. And I think it's an opportunity that shouldn't be wasted. And you should use your 20s to really sort of try a number of different things until you figure out what that thing is that you want to do longer term, because you can really then start to make bigger strides in your career in your late 20s and into your 30s.
Yeah, and I think the part that I loved about what you said is you went on to this topic about free thought and free thinking then. And I just think that is one of the hardest things to develop. And I'm so early on like my learning curve of this as well, because you are just so conditioned by the education system as it is and told what to do. And then you rise through these steps. It's like, okay, do well at school, do well at uni, get a grad job, to sort of like break that and actually figure out what it is that you want. Yeah. It is like the most difficult part, I think. So, I mean, in your experience, how does someone start to like ask themselves the right questions, but also develop that like free thinking ability where they're not constrained by what their parents told them or what the school told them to do?
Yeah, look, I think it's different for everybody. So I think it's important to think, I'm going to discover my own unique journey and free thinking. So I don't think there's a textbook model as such. My model is to sort of go somewhere out into, I'm very drawn to the sea and the beach, and, I love being outside and getting away from work, getting away from, life, from routine, dare I say our parents, our family, even our friends, because all of those people have an influence in our life in good and bad ways. But to really discover who we are and what our free thinking is and what our potential career could be or life could be, what's my vision for myself, I really think it takes some time to sort of spend some time with yourself and really sort of get away from normal life and give yourself the space to do that, away from the influences we have every day. But the flip side of that, I would say as well, is meet new people would be another thing I'd say, you know. And so by meeting new people, you discover new ways of thinking, new experiences that others have had in their lives. And it gives you ideas. You can take snippets of that as something that's valuable to you or not, as far as, wow, I've never thought about that before, but I'm going to think about that more. I'm going to speak to more people and understand that, or do some research to understand what is that role or potential career or lifestyle. I think there's great opportunities to do that today, more so than when I came through university. You know, things like digital nomads, living in a foreign country for a few months, or starting a business, or working with other entrepreneurs, gives you the ability to really expand your experience in a personal sense, as far as, wow, I've got all these new ideas from people I've never met before. I've created new friends around the world, and therefore I've got these new experiences, new influences coming into my life that I would not have had if I'd not left London, as an example, or I'd not left Birmingham or Manchester or Exeter, where I grew up or went to university. Because to a certain extent within those localities becomes a lot of group thinking, as far as what your point in your life you are, societal pressures to what you should be doing at this point in your life, or what your career should be, or the degree that you did, therefore you must be doing this as a career. I do think by breaking the mold of where you've been and bringing in a new influence, be it by location or geography, or by the circle of friends and network that you might have, gives you that positive influence of new ideas. And then I would go back to stage one, which is what we talked about, is like, take some time for yourself to think about what it is that you want for you, the type of person you want to be, the type of life that you want to lead. And again, this doesn't have to be a life decision. It might be just the type of life I want to lead for the next 5 years, or the next 10 years, or where I'd like to be in my 30s. But start to basically develop your own life plan for you. And it might be in short periods, or it might be longer periods. But make sure you're designing the life you want for you, not the life that others want for you.
Like you mentioned at the start of this call, there's so many different opportunities in the way that things have changed now. Like, you can just work remotely and figure that out, or you can work hybrid and spend your weekends in Europe, who knows. But I think something that is pretty cool about your career and what you got up to is you spent a lot of time working in different countries and exploring different spots. I mean, what did you learn about different cultures and about operating these different spaces and joining different companies in different countries? What did you learn from that journey?
Yeah, what did I learn? I mean, the list is endless, I think. And I probably haven't taken long enough to really think about that. I've always been a little bit driven by the next opportunity or the next project or next experience and moved straight on. But I certainly think it's shaped the person I am today. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm originally from Australia. So I grew up in Australia. And when I finished high school, I came to university in London when I was 18. And since I finished university, I've probably lived in, 6 or 7 different countries, lived and worked in 6 or 7 different countries around the world. And I've always come back to London as home. So London is very much still home for me. But I very much throughout my career was driven by the opportunity to explore the world. And I think very much that comes from my Australian upbringing and heritage to be an explorer. But I always saw it as a great personal opportunity, as well as a professional opportunity, to take a new role or job that was going to send me to live in America, or to live in France, Spain, or Dubai. And I kind of jumped at those opportunities. And I think I was driven as much by the role and professional opportunity as I was by the personal experience of living in a different country, learning about a different culture, learning a new language. And so for me, I feel like I've had a rich career. Maybe not as much financially, because I probably could have done and been more successful financially if I'd, stayed in London. But I certainly feel in a personal sense that I've had a richer career than a lot of my peers from my university days, because I've been able to say I've worked around the world, and I've worked with people from cultures around the world. And I think the biggest thing out of that is we very much become global citizens in the true sense, you know. And today I can sit down with somebody from, you know, the Arabic world in the Middle East, or from, you know, Europe, be it, you know, France and Spain, or from Poland, or Italy, you know, from Australia, from Asia, and very much be able to interact, understanding their culture and understanding who they are and the history of their culture. And I think that applies to business as well as personal situations. And I think for me, it's just made me a much more rounded person in a personal sense. But it's also, you know, given me a rich experience background in a professional sense as well. And I feel very comfortable working within a different culture, within a different country, or even in a different language, and still be able to be successful in what you're trying to do. So yeah, I think, to me, to answer your question, my global experience and the opportunity to have that global experience is probably the biggest and best thing I've been able to create and take advantage of within my life and within my career.
If you were graduating again today, would you try and go to London, or would you be exploring these other countries and figuring out somewhere cooler to work?
Do you mean for education, or for personal experience, or for travel?
For just like landing your, you know, you want a bit of everything. You're looking to get your first job. Would you be thinking, let me get one in London, or actually let me explore some other parts of the world and maybe land a job there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a bit of both, really. Like, I think is the right answer. I think it comes down to a personal preference. Like, I think for me, living in a city like London has been one of the best experiences, and I still love it, even after 30 years. But I also don't want to ever lose the ability to sort of experience the world and travel, even work overseas and spend time overseas. I think I probably grew as a person, as a young person, more by my travel and global experiences. I think I matured as a professional, I matured as a person, and just from that experience, I would highly encourage anyone to do that. And I know there's some great programs now in university where you can spend a year abroad, either at another university or through work experience. There's some great companies that give you the opportunity to join them through a work placement and spend 6 months in another country. I think anything that gives you some global experience, or the opportunity, maybe in a structured way or maybe in an unstructured way, like traveling for a year, I think either one of those experiences are going to be a very rich and value-add experience to you as in your development, as both personally and professionally. So I think that's sort of a delicate answer or a diplomatic answer, but I would say a bit of both is just as valuable.
No, I think it's a tough question as well. You know, I've often asked myself, like, should I be based in London because of the amount of network that I could build up there, the people that I'd meet, but then I'd miss out on the opportunity, and it's just this trade-off that you essentially end up paying of like, okay, do I do that thing now, or maybe go to London for another part of my life and my career? Yeah. So I think, like you said, it's personal preference, and just I think there's always a good toss-up of like, where do you think you can go and learn the most right now? Is it going to London? Is it trying your own thing and maybe traveling the world? But, you know, I think it's all dependent on who you are and what you want to dive into. So
yeah,
I think it's...
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree, George. And I think the keywords you just said are spot on, is right now. You know, we don't have to have long-term plans fixed, you know, like life is dynamic and it changes sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for unfortunate personal reasons. But it's not so fixed that you have to make a big decision today. You know, am I going to spend 2026 in London, or am I going to spend it overseas in somewhere, you know, beautiful like Southeast Asia? You know, what is the right place for me in my happiness, my health, my professional development, my personal development, and take a chance. You know, if you think the right place for me right now in my career and developing my business like you are is Southeast Asia, and the contacts I'm making, the people I'm meeting, and the ability I have to build my business from this region, the creativity it gives me for working in a beautiful climate where the sun is shining every day. You know, there's a lot of positives in that alone to say this is the right place for me right now. You know, and that might change in 6 months, that might change in 12 months. and I'm open to that. But right now, I feel like I'm in the right place for what I'm seeking to do, and according to the plans that I have in the sort of short, medium, and long term.
It's really interesting. I think what I'd love to get onto a little bit now is sort of the other angle of things that we haven't really spoken about. We've spoken a lot about students and young people and what they can be doing. I want to also help them by touching on what it is that employers are looking for at the moment. Like, what is it that they want to see in young people to be able to say, like, yes, we want to bring this young person in, train them up. You must have lots of conversations with employers and know what they're looking for and know what it takes to stand out. So yeah, I'm just curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about some of the mistakes or beliefs that students have in their graduate journey and graduate recruitment journey. But I think equally, I see still time and again companies still making mistakes and fixed beliefs that are not so serving of them in the changing market that we are currently in. I still think there is a strong bias towards certain universities in the UK. I think that's a really embedded belief that unless you went to a Russell Group university, we're not going to even consider your application, and I think that's a real mistake. And I think that goes back even further to the type of school that you went to, as far as what, determining what university you get into. And then what university you get into depends what sort of companies you can be applying for or be considered for. And I do think there is this sort of multi-year mistakes that have been made in the graduate recruitment market, which I think is a detriment to how companies are growing and the types of talent that they're attracting. And I think the companies that have figured that out and are more open to, we just want to recruit the best people or the right people or the people that are going to fit really well with us or are passionate about what we do as a company, the product or service that we create, the teams and culture that we've created, the location that we work in. I think companies that are more open and dynamic in their attitudes and their culture is the companies that are really going to attract the best talent. And I still think a lot of the large corporates are still making this mistake because they're very wedded to a type of framework that they recruit to. And that's not something we're so excited about at GradWorx. Yes, we have a lot of large companies and we help them, attract talent to the roles and grad schemes that they have. But the companies that really excite us the most are the small and medium-sized businesses that are growing really quickly, that are looking for talent, but the right talent for them. And you can just see it in the job descriptions and the approach that they have to their recruitment, where it's a lot more collegiate. It's a lot more, let's get to know each other and see if this is the right fit for both of us. Because the only way this works and the only way we retain good talent and attract the right talent is by being really open as to who we are as a culture, the types of opportunities we can give, the types of projects and opportunities we can give you in a training sense. So I think companies that have figured that out, and you can see it represented through the job descriptions that they're posting on GradWorx, that actually this is either a really rigid prescribed process, and therefore the way that they evaluate and make decisions on recruitment is probably similar. And then you have companies that are a lot more nimble, a lot more involving, and a lot more interested in getting to know you as a candidate, as far as how can you shape us, what this role, shape us as a company as to what this role can be and the value you can help us create. So yeah, I think a lot of companies are still making big mistakes as far as being very rigid in the frameworks by which they recruit.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the work that GradWorx is doing. I think that just rethinking the application process and also the way that companies are recruiting is going to be big for the future, and solving that gap, as we spoke about a lot, of like students not knowing really what it takes and needing somewhere where they can go and develop these skills and then apply to companies. And I really love it. So I think as well, what's interesting about this journey, Michael, is that now you're sort of, you're the founder of this company, GradWorx, and you're a solo founder from what I know. And a lot of young people out there are now being told that like the best way, because so many of them can not get jobs, is to just try and start their own business, start something their own. And often that entails them being a solo founder and trying to start something and learn those lessons. What do you think it takes to sort of be a solo founder and just get started on that journey?
Whew, It's a good question, and it's a tough question because it's a tough path to choose. I will be honest; it's not an easy path, and I'm sure you could add stories of your own to this journey and what it takes to be a solo entrepreneur. Look, at the end of the day, I am so excited by the opportunity that today's market gives, particularly through technology and social media, for young people to have an idea and explore that as a potential business of their own as an entrepreneur. And that might be as a solo entrepreneur, like you've said that I've pursued, but it also could be through, fellow co-founders and joining up with other people with complementary skills. And that's a whole discussion on its own, because choosing the right co-founders is such a big decision and a difficult decision. And we could talk about that another time. Being a solo entrepreneur, on the flip side of that, has made it somewhat easier one way, and more challenging in other ways. Certainly I had a really clear vision in my mind that I wanted to transform graduate recruitment and make it a better experience with better results. And we are still in the early days of building exactly what I want to do. But I've still got that same vision I had 2 years ago when we really just got started. And it's given us and me the ability to be more dynamic and move faster, with what we're trying to build and ideas that we have and new ideas that we want to test out. So we've been able to be more dynamic and more nimble in our development phase, as far as, right, we're trying to achieve this big problem. How do we get there, and how do we do that? And we haven't had to sort of operate by committee as such. So we don't have external funding. So we don't have any venture capital funding or anything like that. That might change in the future. But right now, we're very fortunate that we're self-funded, and we're able to support our growth through that. And being a solo founder, it's given me the ability to pick and choose the best people that I want to work with. And we've had some different people come and go, and some different teams come and go. But I've always really sought to work with, people I just find very exciting to work with. They're really good at what they do, and they want to sort of run at the same pace that I am, as far as, let's try and build what GradWorx can be, and really help people with their career journeys. So I think for me, to answer your question, being a solo entrepreneur is been really difficult. It definitely, there are days where you're like, you really got to dig deep to find that resilience and energy to bounce back from setbacks that, notoriously will happen a lot. And at the same time, be energized to continue working towards the goals and the mission that you have. So there is definitely a big challenge there, but it also gives you a lot of flexibility to run at the pace that you want, to design what you're thinking, your vision can be, and also work with some really great people along the way. So yeah, I think that it's a double-edged sword, like most things in life. But if you're the type of person, and you think, I've got the resilience and inner strength, the ideas, the energy, and the drive to create what I've got in my mind, then I'd say give it a go, give it a try. And going back to what we were saying before about your career, doesn't need to be this sort of big, multi-year decision. It might be just something you say, I'm going to give this a year. And I'm fortunate I can fund myself to do that. And I'm just going to give this a try. You might do it on the side. You might have a full-time job and you do this on the weekends or in the evenings. But I'm going to dedicate some time to do it and just see where I can take it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and I'll move on to a new idea or to a new job or whatever it might be. And I think the level of creativity and dynamism in the entrepreneurial market, particularly from the young age group as well, is very exciting. And that's why we're seeing some amazing companies come to them.
Yeah, I think it's a great time for young people to explore that thing, whether they're at uni. The barrier to entry and building something that people will go, oh, that's kind of cool, is like almost zero now. You find someone who's good and can help you vibe code something, or you find someone that can actually code something for you, and you act as like the operations person. You can very quickly build something that helps expand your network, meet other people, and also fail a bunch. So I think it's great.
And there's some great examples out there, right? Like some of the biggest and best tech companies that we all know today originated out of universities, originated from students still at university. So I don't believe in this sort of age thing of you're too young to do it. I believe some of the best ideas come from young people that just spot opportunities or problems they want to solve. And the technology now exists in order to start building solutions around that. And I think harness that creativity, harness that sort of free thinking, even dare I say in a positive way, that naivety as to this could be amazing. And yes, it can be. And so, some of the best tech companies, as we know, that exist today came out of university and students still in university. So now is the time. The restrictions are not as big as you think.
Big time. Awesome. Well, look, I have so much more stuff that I wanted to cover, but we're going to have to save it for next time because I got a final question that I'd love to end it on, which is, if you were 18, 19, 20 years old again, what would you be thinking about focusing on in terms of skill development? What skills would you be looking towards developing and why?
It's such a difficult decision. It's a great decision, by the way, a great question. But I think there's two things I would say. I would say develop that free thinking that we talked about earlier. Don't think you have to figure it out now as to what you want to do for the rest of your life. But if you can develop your free thinking and then take the time now to really think about who you are, what you're passionate about, what you're excited about, and start to look for careers that complement who you are as a person, then that's probably the right direction to explore further. And I would explore, don't sort of feel so rigid in one direction that you neglect or fail to sort of look outside the box, because you might just surprise yourself. So that'd be one thing I would say. And the other one that we're doing a lot on at the moment and is just everywhere is AI and computer science. So much of the world now is driven by, our online presence, our digital products that we use every day on our phone, or the growth and emergence of AI and what that's going to mean for future business. I think the biggest opportunity for young people is their probably natural understanding of what AI is, how to use it, because a lot of people my age in business have no understanding, but know that this is something that's going to be really powerful for business going forward. I think if you want to sort of get into tech and AI, etc., and you can develop some of these early skills from some courses that are around online or through the universities, you are going to be in a really strong position going into the workforce when you graduate. So that would be, on the tech side, something I would highly recommend.
Cool. Michael, it's been a pleasure. Where else can people go and find out about GradWorx?
Yeah, so please come and join us on the GradWorx platform. We're at www.gradworx.io. We're still building our platform. We encourage people to come and join us, give us your feedback. We're still figuring it out and making it better. We're adding new functions and features. We're going through a rebranding at the moment and improving the platform, but we're continually doing that. But we have like over 1,000 jobs and different companies live on our platform every day. So the opportunities are out there. The workforce and recruitment market is not as bleak as everyone makes it out to be. There are great companies out there across the UK and some great roles. So come and join us at gradworx.io and hopefully we can support you in that journey.
Awesome. Well, Michael, it's been fun. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, George. Really appreciate it. All the best. See you soon.